Hey there, this is Amelia here. Welcome to Amelia's crossdressing story. Today we are going to share a story called Never Wanted to Be a Girl Part 9. By Teddy. For more interesting and exclusive stories, please subscribe to my channel and support me at Patreon. And Jody didn't leave when the job was finished. She and Monty announced that they were going to get married. And that their first was due in February. They were both glowing, and Tia cried herself silly. Tia and I were now in straight honors classes, which meant a lot more studying. I found I didn't mind not being horny all the time. And Tia didn't seem to mind having to provide the proper stimulation when appropriate. But I had to give blood every month, and a much more personal sample. Tia helped. But it was still embarrassing. By Thanksgiving, my nipples were so sensitive that I had to get different breast forms to keep from getting irritated. We attended the Christmas prom together. And drew a lot of attention. See, Tia was wearing her new boots, which gave her this incredible sway when she walked. Almost as good as mine. We caused a lot of neck-wrenching among the participants as we wriggled our way across the floor. Dad still couldn't accept what I had become, but he gave me his support and love, and we realized that some things just would never be perfect. By March I no longer needed the breast forms, opting for a smaller chest that was all mine. And I was finally noticing I was growing a figure. When my skirts got a little loose in the waist and really tight in the hips. Tia loved how I looked, and I started to enjoy being a pretty teenage girl. And we both got tapped by Jody for babysitting. Tia loved it. And pointed out it was good training for me. Oh joy and diapers. Tia and I received our Honor Society memberships just before school let out. So we threw a party at the park for all our friends. And that meant it was a big party. Oh, there were quite a few kids that refused to associate with Tia or me, and the God Squad was still a problem. But the more feminine I became, the fewer people seemed to consider me weird. For some reason, as soon as the summer hit, I hit a growth spurt. I was glad I hadn't yet bought many new clothes. Before, Tia and I were almost the same height. And were working on the same measurements. Over the summer I grew 3 inches and put on 15 pounds. Most of it muscle. The endocrinologist said my hormone levels were fine, and it probably meant I was just catching up on my growth. My chest was not getting bigger, but I was developing killer legs. Tia started to complain she was jealous. This time registration was much easier. The old principal had retired, and the new one was big into what he called diversity. The God Squad started in early, and he gave them one lecture, and the next time they caused trouble, he suspended the whole batch of them for a week. I was not the only one being harassed, the gay kids were also being pestered, and it felt good to have some support from the school. It was on a Friday night early in October when Tia and I were awakened by a loud pounding on our front door. Samantha, please, for God's sake, let us in. Please, it's Jill, my brother and I are hurt and... Dad came running down the stairs and stopped at my room. Do you know? She's one of the girls in our math class at school. He dashed out as Tia hurried to put my boots on so I could maneuver. I heard the door open and Dad hollered for Mom to help him and get the first aid kit. When we reached the living room, Dad was helping a small, weird-looking girl to a chair. Jill was standing there, holding her arm at a funny angle and whimpering. Close and lock the door and get me the portable phone. I headed for the door and Tia went to the kitchen for the telephone. When the door was closed, I went and held Jill, who was shaking uncontrollably. Jill, what happened, and who is? I was looking at the other girl. And realized the girl was her younger brother in a dress, with his hair hacked off and his face swollen and scraped. Mom and Dad came home and found Art dressed in my stuff, and started screaming and beating on him, and cut off his hair with a knife, and when I tried to stop them, Mom hit me with something and my arm went snap, and then Art kicked Dad in the face and managed to get the door open, and we've been trying to hide from them and they're looking all over for us, and I remembered you were really a boy and might not throw us out and no one will hurt you here. Dad sounded really angry. I'm calling the police right now. Are your parents on foot or? They're in Dad's minivan. 5 minutes later Dad was off the telephone and helping Mom and Tia splint Jill's arm. I was holding her brother, who was sobbing and babbling that he should be dead because his dressing up got his sister hurt. Art, there's nothing wrong with wanting to look like a girl or be a girl. Mom and Dad said I'm a freak and a pervert and should never have been born and nothing. They can't hurt you now. Not everyone thinks we're sick or strange. Please, let someone help you. No one can help me. I'm really a girl and I'm stuck in this awful boy's body and I hate my life and you can become a real girl if you really want to, it just takes time. Tia came over and hugged us both. Sam is both a boy and a girl. Art looked strangely at me and I nodded. There were flashing lights outside and a moment later a police officer was pounding on our door. Mom let him in and one look at Jill and her sort of brother had him on the radio requesting an additional unit. They need to be taken to the hospital. Can you take them or should I call an ambulance? Dad agreed to take them both and Tia suggested I get dressed and go along. Your mother and I can follow in our car. I needed Tia's help but was ready by the time Dad was dressed. Just as we were heading out the door, the policeman pulled back up and said he would escort us to the hospital. Dad took it fast but carefully as he drove to the emergency room. We were expected, but Art refused to let go of me, and the doctors finally agreed to let me stay with him all the way through their examinations. It turned out that he had nothing but a lot of nasty bruises. The orthopedic surgeon they called in to set Jill's shattered arm was Dr. Sutton, which made it easy for me to assure Jill that she was going to be okay. The police officer that came by to get Jill and Art's statements and verify their condition turned out to be Erica's father, who knew all about me from Erica. When Art found that the officer wasn't overtly disgusted with his wearing a dress, Art broke down, then told a tale of abuse that made me sick to my stomach. I wondered how he had managed to survive this long. Tia wound up driving our car to the hospital and we convinced Dad that we wanted to stay with Art and Jill and he should go home and get some rest. Erica's dad took Dad's statement and Dad headed home. The hospital put Art in a room and said that Jill would be moved there after surgery. So we camped with Art and gave him what he needed most. Hugs. Jill was really out of it when they wheeled her in and I buttonholed Dr. Sutton in the hall. Is she going to be okay? He nodded. She will have a couple of scars where we had to go in and some permanent metal pins, but everything went back together properly. As long as there is no infection, she shouldn't have any lasting problems or disabilities. He looked inquiringly at me. Is her brother like you? I shook my head. He really wants to be a girl way down deep inside. I like who I am, but I can be Samuel or Samantha and be happy. But with my feet like they are, I prefer to be Samantha. He nodded and said he needed to get some sleep. When the police and the person from the social services office came by late in the morning, I was snuggled up to Art in his bed. I was holding him like a stuffed animal and we were both sound asleep. Tia was curled up in a corner with a blanket and pillow. Jill was sleeping and the nurse, before she left around 6 in the morning, had said Jill was given a sleeping pill and would be out for at least 5 hours. So it took a while for everyone to wake up and get coherent, and I called the nurse to get Jill some pain medications. Soon the 4 of us were looking at the person from social services, who seemed, well, disgusted and upset about something. Tia muttered in my ear, "She's a first-class holier-than-thou asshole." Mom and Dad had to deal with her a few times before Dad threw her out of the house and called the governor's hotline to get her off my case. The officer, who I had never seen before, introduced himself as Detective Collins. Mrs. DeLong, from social services. He motioned to the woman, has been assigned as the caseworker for the McGregor children and is going to try and find them a temporary foster home, but she doesn't think anyone will take the boy, Art, if he insists on dressing like a girl. It is difficult enough to find placements for older children, and when one is severely mentally ill My hackles rose fast. You idiot. She is not mentally ill. I got right in her face. Her problem is people like you, bigots and bureaucrats who don't know any better. She backed off quickly and Detective Collins was watching me warily. All she needs is some love and understanding and she will be fine. Excuse me, young lady, but according to the paperwork and doctors, Art McGregor is a 10-year-old boy. Detective Collins was giving me a keep out of this look. And I find it difficult to believe that you are qualified to make a diagnosis about his mental health. She is far more qualified than either of you, and perhaps most of the physicians here, to diagnose Art's problems. They jumped when a voice came from the open door. It was Dr. Nagel, who came into the room uninvited. I am Dr. Cynthia Nagel, a board-certified children's psychiatrist and a friend of Samantha, the girl you were addressing. I went and gave her a hug. It was by pure chance I was here today, as I was visiting a friend who just had gallbladder surgery. When I heard about what had transpired, I decided to drop in and see if there was anything I could do to help. Mrs. DeLong looked really disgusted. Do not but in where you are not wanted, doctor. These two children are now wards of the state, and you are specifically invited not to participate in their care. I had never seen Dr. Nagel mad, but she seemed to grow 3 inches in fangs. Detective, this miserable excuse for a waste of our tax money, who claims to be protecting their interests, is dangerous to the mental health of these two children. She is incapable of being non-judgmental in dealing with the younger child's problems and will psychologically abuse the child if given the chance. Mrs. DeLong started to say something and Tia kicked her in the shin. And I will bring charges of child abuse against you if you allow her to take these children from this hospital. Why you? Mrs. DeLong looked like she was about to punch Dr. Nagel when the officer got between them. Enough. Both of you. Mrs. DeLong, is there any truth in what the doctor is saying? Of course not. I treat all children the same. Mentally ill or perverted young people, homosexuals and children like the younger McGregor child of course require a stronger hand, but that is my area of expertise. Art started to cry and I went to hold him. When I looked back at the officer, I swore there was smoke coming out of his ears. He turned to face the woman from social services. His voice was cold and extremely tense. Mrs. DeLong, these children are still under the protective custody of the police department. Until such time as that changes, I am officially directing you to avoid any contact with them or I will arrest you for interfering with police activities. She stepped back like she had been slapped. Doctor, do you have sufficient evidence to substantiate your claims she is guilty of child abuse in this or previous cases? I am reasonably certain that if a detailed examination of case records is conducted and the affected children are interviewed by qualified children's psychologists or psychiatrists, it will be possible to establish a pattern of overt and covert psychological abuse of children who are homosexual or who have other psychological variations that may be considered by the narrow-minded as abnormal. Are you willing to file a complaint in a professional capacity to that effect? Dr. Nagel took a slow, deep breath. Yes. He turned back to the woman from social services. You are hereby notified that you are being placed under investigation for possible child abuse. I am issuing you a verbal police protective restraining order, effective immediately, which will be followed by a full court restraining order within the required 72-hour time period, barring you from contact with any juveniles, other than you own children, if any, in an official or unofficial capacity, until such time as this matter has been investigated to the satisfaction of the police and the Attorney General's office. Because this is a potential criminal matter, I am advising you of your rights. He pulled a card from his wallet. You have the right to remain silent. That's all for now. See you in the next video. For more interesting stories, please subscribe to our channel, and for exclusive content, please join us on Patreon. Link in the comment.